Hello, good evening everybody. My name's Peter Wainwright. Welcome to this 1 hour long webinar on the power of trust. We've got nearly 50 people logged in from various parts of the world, so feel free to say hi on the chat. And on the panel tonight, I'm joined by Dr. Diana Lowry and Kelly Drury. Diana is a specialist in human resource management with the Open University, and Kelly is a business psychologist. So we'll just hear a hello from Diana and from Kelly. How are you doing?
Hi there. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. And Kelly?
Hi. It's a sunny evening outside here, so hopefully everybody will be able to stay with us.
Yes, it's a lovely sunny day. So I'm hoping when we finish that certainly those of us in the UK will be able to enjoy the sunshine. So. Well, the format for the webinar is there's a panel of myself and obviously the two panelists, and we've got a technical director from Workcast who are supplying the technology in the background. So, Andrew, could we have the next slide, please? And you'll see what the webinar objectives are. Really, is to share some of the highlights from the 22nd of May masterclass that was held in London, and Diana's going to be explaining a bit more about that. And really from a developmental viewpoint for you to gain insights about trust within the workplace, and that's the emphasis in the organizational aspects rather than interpersonal, although there is a relationship. Let's move on to the slide with the format so you can see how we're going to be running this evening. So I will be just confirming how we can pose questions. You've met our panel. You can see their biographies on the top right-hand corner there. In a minute, Diana's going to give us a bit of an overview of the masterclass held on the 22nd of May. And then we have kind of three segments, each one starting with a short video of about 8 minutes. Then we have a poll and a discussion. And we finish at 8 o'clock. And in the participant chat, you can pose questions. There's no ability for participants to use audio, but we will be picking up on the questions that you pose and the interaction, and that will help feed the discussion. Just one thing to let you know, this webinar is being recorded for public use, so just make sure that you're happy with everything that you put in the chat. Perhaps we could hear from Diana a brief overview of the workshop, which will set the context for tonight. So. The workshop we held on the 22nd. So over to you, Diana.
Right, thanks, Peter. Right, everyone, welcome to this evening. I can see that you're from all over the place in various geographical regions, so that's really exciting for us here. As you know, the Open University Business School hosted a Business Perspectives Masterclass event in London on the 22nd of May, and the focus of that event was on the power of trust in organizations. It was a very full day. It was extremely well attended. There was much discussion and debate, and it was a fantastic opportunity for networking. The day went really well. Essentially, the day consisted of different speakers from different industry sectors, the speakers being from both practitioner and academic backgrounds. And trust was explored from a variety of different backgrounds and perspectives. So the underlying explorations of trust involved three broad themes. Firstly, examining how trust is key to long-term competitive advantage. Secondly, learning how to repair and build trust. And thirdly, the focus was on developing and reflecting on how to understand the dynamics of trust within organizations. And they formed the broad themes for the basis of this webinar. Peter, so over to you.
Thank you very much, Diana. Yes, it was a full day, and this evening, with the video segments are from just three of the speakers. The first one is going to be from Dr. Stephen Chase. The second one is going to be from Ruth Sutherland, Chief Executive of Relate, and the final one will be Diana's own presentation. So, and you can tweet away. You can see the Twitter name and the hashtag on the top there. So we have some very active tweeters amongst our academics and alumni. So let us move on to the first video. This is about 8 minutes long, and it's from Dr. Stephen Chase, and it's looking at the organizational dimension of trust. So sit back and relax, and as the video is playing, feel free to post questions in the chat, and after that we'll have a poll and some discussion. So Andrew, if we could have video 1, please. Thank you.
These are the key elements in the procedural justice sense. What is the treatment received? And all of you will know that this concept of fairness is hinged around the idea that if I'm stopped by a police officer and I've been going faster than I should have been going, you are not going to like the outcome, that you're probably going to get fined and points on that. But you accept that outcome much more easily if the way that you are treated in that engagement is entirely fair and polite and respectful. And it's absolutely the same as we play out in organizations. And that's a key area. And that gives us that legitimacy, and that also then gives the police the authority that most of us will do what we're asked to do by the police. We'll comply with the law and we will cooperate with justice because we believe in it. So, fair decision-making, respectful treatment. And if we don't treat people fairly, if we get stopped by the road traffic police and they are rude and disrespectful, then actually that sends out a message to you as a member of the public, to me as a member of the public. Doesn't it? You're treating me not like an equal or with respect, you're treating me as something else, that I'm not valued. So, people obey the law not because of punishment, the research says, but because they believe it is legitimate. And it relies on those 4 things there, as you can see, that participation, we are doing that, the neutrality, the dignity and respect, and the trusting of motives. And what I'm increasingly hearing now is this whole concept around legitimacy as a dialogue. It has generally, in the past, been studied from the public's perspective, and we're now beginning to look at it about what does it mean in terms of self-legitimacy. And I'm beginning to swing towards the internal dimension now. And my very strong held view, and my experience with Thames Valley Police and other organisations, is that if we have that sense of organisational fairness, mutual respect between colleagues, the chances are when we're meeting someone outside our organisation, whether it's the public in our sense in terms of dealing with the issues we deal with, or any other organisation going out there, then actually that makes a massive difference. So, the contention is that the procedural justice model works inside organisations as well as outside. Concerned with exactly the same thing, I have the difficult task sometimes of hearing misconduct cases which could result in the loss of someone's livelihood. The most important thing for me is to make sure that I make a fair and reasoned judgment around that, and that people looking at that would say, that looks like a fair judgment. Because it's not me to assess that. It's for others to assess that. And there are lots and lots of definitions around fairness, but for me that very simple human sense of if I make a decision or make a decision here and you look at that decision, you say, that looks fair to me. Really important stuff. So, dignity, we all want to be treated with respect, and in general we are. We want equality to apply. That doesn't mean that if the answer's no, that means it's not being equal or giving equality. It requires accuracy, and it requires that trust, that legitimacy that we've talked about. So, why does it matter? Who cares? Why does it matter in organisations? Well, it matters for me for the point that I've been saying so far. This point that I want colleagues to believe in the fairness of the organisation in everything that they do, so that the minute they walk out of the door, they will be able to deal with the member of the public in the same way. It's also an organisational risk if it's unfair, And I don't just mean employment tribunals, but the whole reputation issue, as Kirsty has already hinted at. If you get this wrong, then reputation is lost for a very long time. We all know that. We all know it is very hard to build reputation, whether you're a university, whether you're a police service, whether you're an individual. But losing it is dead easy. And it can happen in a click, can't it? We need people to feel confident in their own authority. Again, we have this debate internally. Most of us, if we need to speak to a police officer, we almost expect the police officer to know the answer. I don't expect them to know the answer to everything because that's just not humanly possible. What I do expect is for them to take responsibility for the question that they've been asked. And there's a big difference there. It's underpinned by the professionalism agenda. You will have seen all the stuff about the College of Policing and the move to building a profession. And this, for me, is really key. I'm a strong supporter of this. We are very professional in what we do, but any professional, just like I do in my own world, I'm a fellow of the CIPD, as you know. That's my profession in terms of that sense, and I think it's absolutely important that we have that. Now, this is my drawing based on how I'm trying to think through how we get this more embedded within policing, not just in Thames Valley Police. The first thing is I want the space to be there for people, you and I, to have a debate about the issues. If we disagree about something, we should be able to have that debate. There should be space for that debate, and there should be an openness about that. If I don't like the behaviour of a colleague, or vice versa, there should be the opportunity for that challenge to take place. And some of the worst things that happen in all organisations when things go wrong is you have a fear culture where no one will challenge. I have to say to you folks, and I say this, and I said it yesterday at a session around ethics and integrity with a lot of police officers and police staff, I cannot think of anything worse as a leader where I had created an environment where no one would challenge. Because that is really dangerous. I have to tell you, that's not like that. I get challenged all the time, I can tell you, which is great. And then the next level for me on this inverted pyramid is that we can then change the behaviour through management intervention. The step up from that. And you'll notice that I have deliberately not put misconduct, performance, rules and procedures on there. Clearly, they underpin that when things go badly wrong. But they don't go badly wrong that often in terms of large organisations like mine.
Okay, so that's a nice introduction to some quite important areas about trust and fairness and procedural fairness. We've now got poll 1 that's up on screen, and in a minute I'm going to ask Andrew now if you could just launch, well, in a second, just put the box up and you'll see how you can vote. So what we're trying to do is get some real-time polling. What is your most important priority for promoting fairness at work? And you can see those answers repeated at the top there. Is it A, developing greater mutual respect within your organisation as a whole? Is it developing greater mutual respect between your staff and your customers and suppliers, that external relationship? Or is it about creating more time and space for having those difficult issues, difficult conversations in the organisation? Is it being much clearer about the code of ethics you have, or maybe you're just not sure? So if you would like to click one of those, please. And while that is going on, I'm going to bring in Diana and Kelly on a couple of things. Diana, Jack posted there on the chat about integrity being important, above trust, and he said he wants to ask the academics, is this kind of common sense, or is there some research behind it? So could you give us an indication, Diana, as to the sort of research that's telling us that it may not be quite so obvious as we think?
The impact of trust within organisations has been pretty heavily researched now, actually since, well, through the 70s, 80s and 90s. It's obviously surfaced as a recent issue, I think because of, recent economic events and downturns and so on, but there is a vast body of academic research to support the idea that high trust within organisations has some really significant beneficial outcomes. For example, one of the things that impacts positively in terms of trust is the notion of the psychological contract. And this is the idea of mutual exchange, the sort of expectations that we have from our employers and how well they're fulfilled. So trust and the psychological contract are very much linked, as are, again, I mentioned before, the concept of engagement. Trust and engagement are seen to be positively correlated. Other sort of... so essentially what we have then are some behavioural outcomes as well as attitudinal outcomes that have been proven to be positively correlated with trust.
Okay, can I just put you on hold there, because I'm just looking at the time, and can I ask Andrew, our technical director, could you pop up the results of the poll on the screen, because that might then inform our debate even further. So everybody has voted, or most people have, so on the screen, here we go. Gosh. So the biggest chunk is for developing greater mutual respect within the organisation. And the next one, perhaps, is developing greater mutual respect with external entities. Can I bring Kelly in? Do you have any comments on this poll? Is it any surprises for you, or about that first answer? What do you think, Kelly?
No, I think that it's an area that we classically sort of see being needed in sort of quite a few organisations. I guess all of these things are important. I imagine people, when they were completing the poll, might have been sort of wanting to select all of those points, perhaps, or equally are finding them doing well in each of their organisations. I just wanted to pick up on what Diana was saying about looking at trust in organisations and how you'd actually sort of measure the effectiveness. I do a lot of work with individual organisations, looking at how they link trust and engagement to what's happening in their organisation. And although often we know that things like engagement or trust are important, there's so many other issues that can affect the extent that people feel engagement. I don't know if you find that in your research, Diana, but often there's other factors affecting how people trust the organisation.
There are definitely, and I mean, up until now we've sort of talked about trust as though it's a kind of singular concept that can be applied in an either-or fashion with anybody at all throughout an organisation. But of course, it's not really that simple, is it? And so we're going to have varying degrees of trust with different people at different levels within an organisation, and that's where things start to get quite complex. And where there's quite a bit more thought, I think, and analysis that we need to have when we talk about trust.
Absolutely. Often I see in organisations that people trust their local team, their local manager, but this wider concept of organisation or people that are much more remote that you don't see day to day, the trust is affected at that level. So you may see high levels of trust locally. Yeah. And people tend to focus more on working with their team and working with that local group.
Okay, look, folks, I'm going to have to move us on to the next video, so thanks very much for that. Hopefully we'll make up the time. So keep your answers flowing. It's a really, really interesting questions and points coming through. So we're going to move on to video 2 now, where Ruth Sutherland, the CEO of Relate, is talking about trust and really focusing on the quality of relationships in the workplace. So, Andrew, if we could have video 2, which runs for about 8 minutes.
What do we know about workplace relationships? Well, our interest in this started from the volume that we hear about it played out in personal relationships. So we poll our counsellors. We have about 1,700 counsellors around the country, and we poll them regularly on what are the key themes. Well, financial pressure, you won't be surprised, is the number one thing. And it's been the number one thing for a long time. And obviously with austerity, that has been escalating. But the intrusion of work into personal and family relationships has been growing in momentum for quite some time. We hear about the BlackBerry in the bed. We hear about the impact. We provide sex therapy as well, and we hear about the impact on sex. That people are tired, people are overworked, people, as I say, have got the BlackBerry in the bed instead of other things. A new thing that's crept into that polling thing has been job insecurity. And the heightened anxiety about losing your job or not getting the promotion or not being successful in the reorganisation has heightened that kind of intrusion. So, and we also know about the impact between, or the interrelationship, if you like, between home relationships and workplace relationships. There was a study done by Working Families and 1+1 last year that showed, it was called Happy Homes, Productive Workplaces. And it actually showed that people who were good at their personal and their home relationships were actually good at relationships in the workplace, and that there was a direct link there. So actually employers have a vested interest in supporting the individuals to have good home relationships, because actually it will benefit in terms of the productivity and all of those things. What we know about relationships is that they're key to health and well-being. We are born wired for connectivity. That's how we are made. And from the moment that you first look into a baby's eyes, or the moment you have conceived that child, there begins a relationship. And there begins a trusting relationship. And your experience of that early attachment is actually something that equips you as you go through life to have effective relationships throughout the whole of your life. And where there is often damage in those early attaching relationships and relates experiences, that is not terminal. It doesn't mean you can't have good relationships, but it means that you're going to have to learn. And the support you need. But the good news is that you can learn and you can have successful relationships. And we think that there's a lot of parallels that can be drawn between the personal relationships and the work relationships. We see that good quality relationships are a key resource for life. They see you through thick and thin. They are key to resilience. And that the connection between personal, family, social and work is absolutely there. But it's your relationships that are under pressure at key transition points in your life and when you're experiencing work pressure. So the thing that you need most is the thing that is under attack. And that's what we have to pay attention to. And I think that one thing I just wanted to reflect from the personal arena is that a breach of trust in a personal relationship, and many of you will know this, but a breach of trust in a personal relationship is catastrophic. It is monumental in terms of the impact on you. So what I'm saying is it matters. Breach of trust matters. And if it matters in your personal life, it certainly matters in your work life. So I think that the thing I wanted to draw out really here was the significance of culture. And clearly culture is the way we behave, it's the way that we do things. And in my experience in different charities and in the public sector, the strategic gap that appears between what you're trying to achieve and where you are, that gap is made, we talk about the gap being made up between things like resources, culture, but culture, in my experience, is always underplayed as something that could diminish the gap between where you are and where you want to be. But the irony of that is that culture is the thing that is within our gift, because culture is how we behave, so we can change the way that we behave. But because people tend to think that it's all about other people and not about them, nobody seems to think that where does it start? And clearly it starts with some of the role modelling. I think there is a whole issue around responsibility and whose responsibility is this? You know, the employer, well, that's nothing to do with us, you know, people have to get on. But then we started to have this kind of what-if kind of conversation. And this is really where Relate is partly why I'm here. I'm interested in working with other people from other parts of the, who are interested in this, that we can try and start developing some solutions. What we think could be a what-if employers and employees built a spectrum of support in their workplace. And that the organisational culture is clearly the foundation. So organisational culture then at the bottom, but embedding that in and then providing the information and self-help stuff, but in the workplace, applied to your workplace, constructed by you and your employees as to what works. Is it on tap? Is it online? Is it available? But the skills in development. And then the next part is, is the sort of supportive interventions. Live chat, as I said, is one of our fastest growing channels, and it's immediate. We get a Monday lunchtime peak when people have had a crap weekend, and they come on their smartphones to us, and the typical question is, she says we have to talk, I don't know what to say, help. Now, that's a very different client than we had when it was the 39-year-old woman who was dragging a partner to support. But people need immediate kind of help and support. So we think that there is a coaching model that could be offered on workplace relationships, a coaching model. We think there's a relationship counselling model, workplace relationship counselling model, when people have relationships that really need to work and they want to work together on making them work. And as we say, if people are not, programmed with being able to have good relationships, it is possible to learn. And then it builds up to there being a more specialist intervention. But that customer journey is not a kind of logical one. People need to be able to dip in and out where they are with that and enter at any point. So this is something that we would like to create. And we think that there could be something called RQ that would be somewhere in between IQ and EQ, and that it would be around relational capability. How relationally intelligent is your organisation and the individuals that work in it? How could you learn how to monitor that and grow that and develop that? I think my parting shot is that people who get on, get on. That is the simplicity of this. So companies that employ people who get on also get on. And we've seen that this morning.
Okay, well that is a really interesting take on a different angle, looking at relationships, relational quality, whether it can be supported, invested in. It'd be interesting to see in the participant chat whether you have any experience in your organisations of actively investing in this sort of thing. I'm going to leave poll 2 up for quite a while, because if you remember, it's based on that pyramid we saw. And it's really about how can you best support you or your immediate management or your work team. How can you best support relationships at work, i.e. things that you might start to do in the future? Is it we'll go from the bottom of the pyramid, if you like. Perhaps the easiest one, is it having a more universal awareness about creating a supportive sort of culture? Is it about the next one up, information and education, perhaps having self-help and relationship education, making that available, even talking about it? Is it supportive interventions in terms of relationship coaching to managers and leaders? Is it about targeted interventions where actually people can go for relationship counselling actually in the workplace? Or is it specialist interventions, actually providing mediation in the workplace or between your workplace situation and someone outside? But I think perhaps in the workplace. So if you'd like to click one of those, and perhaps we can have an extended time talking about the results. So, Andrew, if we could close the poll in about 30 seconds. So what's your kind of gut feel of which of those you'd like to choose? So while we're having a look at that, can I just ask Kelly very briefly, this concept of relational intelligence, RQ, Just wondering what your thoughts are on that. Is it something that we actually need to positively look at and invest in, or do we think that relationships will just get better as we do better things as managers and leaders anyway? Do you have any thoughts on that?
When I heard this, when I attended the workshop the other week, I thought it was a really lovely idea to have a relationship quotient. So yeah, I was really interested when Ruth was talking about it. My sort of immediate thought when she mentioned it was about to what extent relationships and caring for people and showing, sort of thoughts about people's well-being in the organisation, to what extent we're outsourcing a lot of those relationships now. Often, we have external coaches, or we have employee assistance programs, or there's online support from an outside organisation. And often these relationships have kind of moved outside the organisation. Perhaps this used to be the role that some union representatives had in organisations previously, and perhaps this is something that we have lost touch of slightly. So I thought the idea of having the relationship quotient actually back in the organisation and having those relationships active within the organisation was a really important point that Ruth made.
Yeah, I like the point about the idea that you could outsource relationships or improving relationships is interesting, strange but intriguing, but it does happen. Right, we've got the results up now, and most of you, more than half of you, 54%, have said actually universal awareness creating a supportive environment. Now, if you want to continue the chat, you'll have to cancel on the poll results, and then your chat box becomes live. So I'm just going to ask Diana. I mean, that's surprising, and I just wondered how we actually do that. How do we create that universal awareness? And what does creating a supportive environment mean in terms of relationships?
I'm not absolutely sure how to answer that question, other than the result of that poll is really fascinating to me. So I may not be that useful in answering the particular question, but I think what this does is really highlight the idea of yes, things like a relational quotient and so on, but also the importance of cooperation within organisations. And I think this has come about for a number of reasons, a number of changes that we see in organisations, structural changes such as we work more in sort of lateral alliances, things like teamwork and so on. And so I think that the emphasis on creating a supportive environment is really symptomatic of the need for strong cooperation within organisations. And again, that really puts a strong argument for a need for trust and for a high trust culture. So,
okay. It is. It sounds like it's a long-term game to keep building it up. I'm just going to, before we go quickly to our next sort of video, under 31% put item C. So if anybody in the participants, any of you have got examples of providing these supportive interventions, or can say what actually would you like to put in place in your organisation, that'd be quite handy. So that's that middle one there, supportive interventions. Actually providing, relationship coaching, so managers can be more effective, or not just managers, anybody can perhaps have access to that. So let me just ask you, let's have a quick look at a couple of these questions that have come across here. There's one here which is about single events can destroy attempts to perhaps build trust, and I guess that probably links to kind of relationships and what Ruth said in the video, that these relationships, once you've had a broken relationship, takes a long time to repair. So maybe it's about actually the ability to repair those relationships more quickly. And there's some comments there about a hierarchy in the NHS. Interesting one, because the UK NHS has got a million employees, so it's really interesting when we talk about that term. The NHS raises lots of questions. I'm going to move us on, but do keep firing away the participant chat, because we do need to get to video 3 so that we finish on time. And video 3 is Diana's piece here, so she'll be well placed to explain or to take questions afterwards. It's a nice segment, all continuous as it were, so it should explain itself. So Andrew, please can we have video 3, Diana Lowry talking about leadership in the trust ecosystem.
One way of thinking about the trust ecosystem is to think about it as a type of trust culture that either allows or inhibits trustworthiness to occur or not. It relies on those traditional pillars of trust and trustworthiness, those being, first of all, ability, benevolence, integrity, and also predictability or consistency. Essentially, what the report relies on, the assumption is that organisations will tend to have a dominant type of leadership related to one of those 4 pillars, depending on the type of organisation and the industry sector. And another assumption that's carried through this idea of an ecosystem, and we know this to be true, is that leadership is incredibly important in that the values of leadership will be cascaded throughout an organisation. So if leadership is characterised by a certain mode of trustworthiness, that then gets cascaded throughout. Okay, so just in a nutshell, really, this CIPD report argues really that there are 4 different types of ecosystems. So each, 4 different types of organisational cultures of trust. The first one, type 1, are the organisations that will emphasise ability. Type 2 is an organisation where leadership, trustworthiness is emphasised in terms of the benevolence of leaders. Type 3 emphasises integrity as the main value that leaders would have. And type 4, as it says there, emphasises predictability or consistency of behaviour. All right, well, what does this actually mean? If we think about a trust ecosystem or an organisation that has a dominant trust ecosystem, which is type 1, where the emphasis is on the ability of leaders, obviously there the focus is on capability and competence. How capable are leaders? How competent are they? And so the definition in that type of ecosystem or that type of organisation would be something along the lines of a trustworthy leader is capable of getting the job done, very much on this notion of ability. So if we move on to the second type of ecosystem, trust ecosystem, that may be dominant within an organisation, this is where the concept of benevolence is overly focused. With benevolence, there is very much a focus on caring, on interpersonal relationships, and strong relationships and interpersonal interactions. So a trustworthy leader within this type of type 2 ecosystem is one that very much cares about their employees and has their employees' best interests at heart. So the emphasis here, the key words are on support and concern for employees. So if we move on to the type 3 type of trust ecosystem, no one would dispute that integrity is a bad thing. It's a very good thing, especially for leaders. But again, it's a matter of balance. Now, the key words, obviously, with integrity are things like a focus on honesty, transparency of processes. So here, the definition of a trustworthy leader is someone who has the right intentions, tells the truth, doesn't back down, and doesn't shy away from things. In type 4 trust ecosystems, the emphasis is on predictability. And here the focus is on behavioural consistency. In other words, a trustworthy leader does what they say they are going to do. Okay, they carry out their intentions, they have a clear vision and they carry that vision out. So the key phrases here are things like consistency in performance, delivery on deadlines. Again, these are highly admirable qualities of good leaders, but the problem is if there's an overemphasis on
this type of quality of trust, there may be risks associated with it. And some of the risks associated with an overemphasis on predictability as one of these pillars of trust is that predictability may actually serve to stifle innovation and employee empowerment. One of the things associated with predictability is highly standardized systems and routines. So that, yes, consistency in performance, always reaching deadlines and so on. But sometimes that can be to the detriment of allowing creativity, innovation, and this notion of empowerment. So I'll just repeat this again. The assumption is behind this that all four of these pillars need to be held together in some sort of balance. There's no doubt that different organisations in different industry sectors are going to have a dominance of one pillar over the other. But again, the assumption is that they are all there in some measure. But of course, it's not as easy as that either. It's entirely situational. And so one of the other things that's mentioned in the report that's very important is that trustworthiness, leadership trustworthiness, is going to manifest in different types of ecosystems. There will be dominant modes of different ecosystems depending on various factors. So, for example, there's the industry context, the organisational context, and an external relationship context. And I'll use some examples here. Some of them we've already talked about this morning. So, for example, if we think about industry context to start with, I think we could possibly, hopefully agree that in the public sector, predictability is key. Meeting deadlines and so on is and consistency of behaviour in the public sector is a highly valued quality, especially in terms of leadership. But we can contrast that, I suppose, with organisations that operate in highly specialised contexts, especially in the private sector, who, rather than emphasise predictability, they would emphasise knowledge, technical knowledge and ability of their leaders. So can you follow what I'm saying? In one sector there'd be an emphasis on predictability, perhaps in another industry sector an emphasis on knowledge and ability. If we take it down to the organisational context of these trust ecosystems, the sorts of things that are important here are things like the organisational heritage, also the structure, the size and the strategy of an organisation. And one of the organisations mentioned this morning was the John Lewis Partnership, and that's one of the examples that are given in the CIPD report. So they obviously have a partnership structure, and there's very much an emphasis there on relational working and personal interactions and so on. So it's highly likely that in an organisation like JLP that benevolence would probably come to the fore in their trust ecosystem and be a very valued quality of leadership there.
Okay, so our final poll is really to ask you, which type of trustworthiness does your organisation appear to promote? You can only choose 1 to 4, not a mix. So does your organisation have a tendency towards emphasising ability, type 1, or type 2, emphasising benevolence, type 3, is it about emphasising integrity, or type 4, emphasising predictability? So that's which type of trustworthiness does your organisation appear to promote right now? So I'm just waiting for some interesting, hopefully some comments will come up in a second. But can I just ask, Diana, in this model that you've seen developed by CIPD, what kind of insights, is it sort of giving you? I mean, maybe this idea of trust is a lot more complicated than we think at the organisational level, or what? What do you think of this approach?
I think that the approach that's presented in this CIPD report, just briefly, is a very useful one. It's a good sort of model or template, if you like, for diagnosing your own organisation. But to answer your question, I actually think that the whole question of trust is a very complex one, and many of the participants in tonight's webinar really pointed to some very interesting issues and complexities, some really good points being raised. I think really what we have to understand at the outset is that we're talking about trust within, generally speaking, capitalist economies, and so we're talking about a type of bounded trust, if you like. We do have a fundamental inequality in the employment relationship. So there's all these types of issues of power and control that are vested throughout that employment relationship. So what we're talking about is trust, and a reciprocal notion of trust, and the importance of that within a context that is quite vexed and problematic in terms of power structures. So while these types of models and templates, such as in the CIPD report that I presented on the day, they're very useful. In fact, I think they're incredibly useful. We always have to bear in mind that we're talking about a very complex concept within a very complex environment. We can't get away from that. Nevertheless, trust is important within organisations. It would be incorrect to just be head in the sand about it. So even though it is a complicated concept in a vexed environment, it is absolutely something that we do need to come to terms with.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, let's now see if we can get the poll results up and see what we have here. Gosh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's really, really interesting. So, type 1, 43%. I was expecting an awful lot more of type 4. So, I'm going to ask Diana for a quick sort of, your reflection on that. Then bring Kelly in, and let's see if we got some questions coming through on the chat. So, Diana, could you? What's your response to this this poll you've seen, please?
Yeah, it's very interesting actually that this idea of the emphasis on type 1 emphasising ability, because one of the risks of that type is that if there's a very strong emphasis on getting the job done and technical ability. There can sometimes be a risk of that in terms of being too strong an emphasis on, as I said on the day, on numerical data and things like key performance indicators and so on. In other words, output and so on. And also, there's a related risk in terms of there being a strong focus on individual ability over collective achievements. So it's very interesting that we've got this result for this poll, but the results for the previous poll were emphasising more, a different type of trust. So I think we've got a bit of a sort of a contradiction here, which I find quite fascinating. Or maybe this is an area that people recognise that their organisations emphasise this type, when perhaps they may now understand that this is an overemphasis. Because the idea really is that you have all 4 of those pillars, all 4 of those types, without one being dominant.
Right, that's interesting. So, Kelly, what do you think about this idea of a kind of a balance? That a healthy organisation is one that has a kind of a mix in these and doesn't have a particular excessive emphasis on any one sort of dimension or type.
When we were talking about this in the workshop at the masterclass itself, the group round my table were finding it initially quite easy to narrow it down to 2 particular areas of trust type, but then it was very, very hard trying to select one of those 2. I think we looked at what the risk factors were. As Diana had pointed out in a presentation, in order to try and work out where the emphasis might be in the organisation.
That's interesting. I mean, I just wondered. I've just seen an interesting point by Julius. I work for a Type 1 organisation and was told that my team were performing at too high a level and making other finance managers uncomfortable. I guess that's Diana's point about excessive drive, and I imagine a lot of people might recognise that excessive reliance on data, key performance indicators, that kind of thing. Just one or two very interesting. The points coming up on the chat. I'm sure you can all form your own opinions. It's a very, very complex sort of area. I'm looking at the time now, and we really need to move on to a kind of final Q&A and sort of summary. So what I'll do is I'll just ask Kelly for some brief parting comments, and then Diana perhaps to summarise it, and then I'll finish with some kind of admin points about how you can get more information. So, Kelly, any sort of thoughts from what you've seen today on the discussions and from people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's some really interesting points made, and it just shows what a big subject trust is, and really need to sort of pick one or two areas to focus on, and how that might work in organisations, because there's so much about individual relationships, about whether there's trust. I think one thing that I did want to pick up on was about whether you can actually have too much trust in organisations. I've noticed that a few people on chat have been talking about the importance of trust for making change happen in organisations, and the impact that high levels of trust are great when times are good, but obviously trust can be damaged when there's lots of change and unpredictability, and that makes it very hard for leaders to be able to manage proactively. So I think that was a key point that people were picking up on. I remember Diana making the point that John Lewis Partnership had found that it was a big investment that they needed to make in their change program to maintain trust.
Yes.
To get a high level of trust in the organisation, it really does require a lot of investment of time in relationships, in getting proactive communication. And I think that's often why trust does fall down in organisations, because they're not invested in proactively.
That's a very, very good point. I think it is a complex area and needs a lot of investment. And Diana, just from the academic and perhaps the research and sort of teaching perspective, and this is an area where there's lots of inquiry and research going on. This whole area we've been looking at, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge area. It's becoming an increasingly well-researched area. I'm really fascinated by some of the comments that are coming through, actually, on the participant chat. They're really good observations. I wish we had more time to pursue some of them. Do you want me to sort of sum up, Peter, or what? How should we?
Well, I'm just wondering if you would want to say something about how this fits in with because this is part of one of our series of business perspectives webinars, and it's very much the opportunity for the academic community to link up with business and sort of and make people aware of what's going on, isn't it? Yeah,
definitely. This area of trust in organisations is a big issue, actually. We've just launched, we're just about to launch an executive education course on trust, and some of these issues that are coming through from the participants are really giving me an idea of where the levels of understanding of trust are, and I have to say it's quite sophisticated. And in terms of academics informing practitioners, I think there are such terrific insights out there with the participants that we have tonight. I think that one of the ways that academics can inform this debate on trust is, for example, with the last poll, when there's such a strong emphasis on that sort of type 1 and ability, that such a strong emphasis on getting the job done, and that seemed to be trustworthy, to sort of combine that with what some of the participants are saying about how can you ever have trust when you've got such strong performance management cultures.
Yes.
I think really you've kind of answered your own questions there in a way regarding that, because you're probably going to struggle to have trust in that sort of strong performance management, KPI output sort of culture. I think what's required is a much greater development of qualities such as integrity, benevolence, all of these sort of softer issues that people really do. That's the hard stuff, you know.
Absolutely. Well, that's a really interesting message for us to sort of to move towards a finish with. So when you go back to talk to your colleagues, or those of you who've joined us, and when the KPIs come up for debate, remember this issue about trust, and raise the question about these different types, type 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, look, let's move on to the next slide, because this just tells you how you can further participate and get in touch. You're going to receive an email telling you the recording is available, so feel free to share that with people. If you weren't on this, you can still, as I understand it, still log in and get that recording. There's the email for the Alumni and Careers Network office. We've got very active LinkedIn groups. And the LinkedIn information, I think, has recently been revamped. And on the next slide, there's the website for the Alumni and Careers Network. And there are over 90,000 alumni, and I'm sure there are other folks who've joined us today from the other communities. So it is really a very, very powerful network. So it remains for me to just say thank you very much indeed to all our participants, and especially to Diana Lowry and to Kelly Drury and the team, Andrew and his team at Workcast, and all the backstage crew within the OU. So that's a wrap for tonight. So thank you very much indeed, and look forward to receiving more of your tweets and information. Keep the debate going. Thank you and good night.